Hello, everyone, and welcome to Heads Up, the weekly webcast and podcast of the National Headache Foundation. I'm Dr. Lindsay Weitzel, migraine strategist, founder of Migraine Nation, and chronic daily migraine survivor. I'm super excited to tell you I have a new guest today that has never been on the podcast before. I'm here today with Dr. Marcy Yonker. Hi, Dr. Yonker. How are you today?
Hi, Lindsay. How you doing?
I am great. Thank you so much for being here. So Dr. Yonker is a pediatric neurologist, headache specialist, and a professor at the University of Colorado Children's Hospital. She works with children who have headache and migraine. And I have her on today because I have a super interesting topic that I think parents are really going to want to listen in on. This is something that has come up because I was a child with chronic migraine. I have a child who has been diagnosed with chronic migraine. And I really think we should talk about screen time. I think there's a lot of confusion out there, and we should have this conversation on what the role of screen time is when you have a child with migraine. I think we're going to learn a lot today, all of us. So the phrase screen time is often used in a negative context, but if you stick around, we may have a positive thing to say about it too. So let's get started. So Dr. Yonker, I do think there's some confusion out there. So to clarify, let's just start by talking about what pediatric associations say about screen time. Like, what are the current guidelines that are out there?
Right. Well, the AAP has a very strict guideline about the amount of screen time that young children are supposed to have.
Right.
And, I think that it's based in good intentions. But I think that human beings are very individual, and you have to tailor things to what an individual person needs, in particular, somebody with migraine.
Right.
So, I think the rationale behind the AAP's guidelines is so that kids are up and active, so that they're not unduly influenced by advertising, so that they don't start to develop bad body images because of what we see on TV. And I think that's all really fantastic. But as you pointed out, screen time has a very negative connotation. And I don't know that it is entirely based on evidence around migraine in particular.
Right. So what I was going to say is, as I was, we planned this episode, and then I went to do the research in order to get ready for it. And I was pretty surprised. It actually has not been studied very much, and there's not much data out there related to headache and migraine and screen time. Right. So I'm sure there's people that it's a trigger for, and I'm guessing you would know that if you're one of those people, or if there's phases of your migraine that you need to avoid it because of the photophobia.
Sure.
Right. But we don't have a ton of data. Is there data that we have that you're aware of? Is there specifics? Did you want to touch on that?
Sure. I mean, there's just really a very small amount of data. And I think we have to look back and one comment that migraine isn't one disease. We haven't found one cause for migraine. And even individuals with migraine have different symptoms. And even in the definition of what constitutes a migraine, you don't have to have light and sound sensitivity. You can just have nausea and vomiting. And so to have a one size fits all for everybody with migraine doesn't seem like a good idea, because people are individual. And if something bothers them, they're going to naturally avoid it if it makes their pain worse.
Right.
So really, there are very few studies, as you have discovered and shared with me. So it looks like there are really just a few things. There was a study by Lund that looked at migraine and non-migraine headache in 139 patients over 3 months. And they showed that there was an increase in headache in patients with increased screen time in kids with migraine with aura only. So kids who had other types of headaches, migraine without aura, didn't have an increase in headache with screen time in comparison with kids who didn't have headache. So if you think about that, it kind of makes some sense about what we know with migraine with aura, because we know that people who have migraine brains are often more sensitive to environmental stimuli. And we know that people with migraine with aura are sensitive to light stimulus. So you
Yes.
can trigger migraine aura and migraine with aura individuals with that by presenting a photic stimulus. So it would make some sense that those particular people might be prone to having more headaches. And again, this was a small study, so you know, even the conclusions that were drawn here can't be generalized to everybody with migraine with aura.
Mm-hmm.
That probably in and of itself is not just one gene problem.
Right.
Um, but it would make sense that those people might be more sensitive to screens and to lights,
Mm-hmm.
because you could trigger a migraine with a photic stimulus in some of those individuals.
Right.
So that kind of makes some sense. But for everybody else, it didn't change their headache frequency. It didn't make them more likely to have headaches.
Okay.
Then there's another study that looked at young adults, so not children. So the mean age in this study was 20.
Mm-hmm.
And they showed that migraine sufferers had increased screen time in comparison with other students who didn't have migraine. So that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't say anything causal about it.
Right.
It means that people who had migraines spend more time on screens. So maybe people with migraines spent more time on screens because they had to, because they couldn't go out and do things. They maybe couldn't attend classes personally because it
Right.
wasn't possible for them having a migraine, but they could tolerate being on the screen and getting their stuff done.
Right.
So it doesn't really say anything about whether people with migraine should or shouldn't be using screens.
Right.
And then the last study really looked at all the studies that were done on people with concussion.
Right. Now this is interesting, the concussion
Yeah.
data.
Right. And what this article looked at was actually a review of all the literature around concussion and screen time, because there was a belief that screen time could prolong people's recovery from concussion.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, there was no evidence in looking at all these studies. There were a few studies that showed a positive association. There were a few studies that showed a negative association, but most of them showed that there was actually no difference at all.
Mm-hmm.
So for people with concussion, it really didn't support recommending that they not do things.
Okay.
And really, when you're dealing with somebody with concussion, you know, the way you have them return back to activities is you have them try things. And if
Right.
they tolerate them, they can keep going. If they
Mm-hmm.
don't tolerate them, they need to take a little step back, give themselves a little more time. So again, it's a very individually tailored thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't appear from what study has been done that it makes any sense to tell an individual who has post-traumatic headache what they should or shouldn't do. They should be able to determine what they can tolerate to
Right.
get back into their own life.
Right. So now personally, I could say this from so many angles because I run into parents with kids with migraine, and this is
Sure.
why I wanted to sort of start talking about this. But then I was a kid with
Right.
chronic migraine, and I have one. So
Right.
I think the worst thing that can happen is be someone in horrible pain, stuck in bed. The migraine's job in my mind is to bring your mind down a rabbit hole. It wants you to be depressed, anxious, miserable. And so what I am always trying to do when you've got especially a kid in terrible pain is what can distract them that they can
Right.
do, what will help them keep their mood up, help them feel empowered and not feel like a victim. These are my goals. So when I run into a parent who feels like they have gotten the message that they're supposed to put their child in a dark room and leave them there until they're better with no distraction, no screens, etc., I get a little worried because I use empowering movies. I use funny movies. I use things like that. If you're in a phase of migraine where it doesn't hurt your eyes, I use that to keep everyone's mood up in my family and everywhere.
Exactly.
Right. So is this something that in your medical opinion is okay? Is this something you would recommend to people?
Absolutely. And again, people are individuals, and I find that there's a lot of blaming the patient for their own biologic disease.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, somebody sees a doctor for their headaches and they give them this whole list of things that they should be doing.
Right.
You shouldn't be on screens too much. You need to drink this much water. You need to eat this way. And so, yeah, sure, being healthy and doing good things is a good thing for everybody's health. but in a way it sort of blames the patient for having their own problem. And many of the people that I see aren't doing anything wrong.
Mhm.
And they'll come in and the parent will say, oh, the first thing we did was reduce his screen time. And I'm like, yeah, and you're still in my office anyway,
Mhm.
because that really isn't what the problem is. And
Mhm.
so we don't understand what the genetics of migraine is.
Right.
And I keep teasing my patients that they're going to go and get their PhD in neuroscience and neurogenetics, and they're going to figure out what all the different genes are. And so we can do a test on you to say, okay, well, this is what kind of migraine you have. This is what people like you should avoid. These are the medicines that work for you. This is what's probably going to happen to you until you get older. But until we have that information, people are just making it up. So
Mhm.
I think that you have to let the patient decide
Mhm.
what works for them.
Mhm.
And as I shared with you earlier, I've had battles with people who take care of the patients we admit to the hospital, because
Mhm.
I have in place these order sets that would get triggered as soon as somebody was admitted for migraine, that said that they weren't allowed to go to the teen room, that they had to stay in their room, that they couldn't use screens. And I thought, that's horrible. Why are you punishing this person?
Mhm.
These things may help to distract them from their pain and may help them feel better. Why aren't we asking them what they feel up to doing? Because
Mhm.
as you said, distraction is the key to this.
Right.
Laying in bed with the lights off and thinking about how much your head hurts just makes things worse.
Mhm.
So we need to let the patient decide what they're capable of doing. And
Mhm.
we know that humor is great medicine.
Right.
Laughing definitely makes people feel better.
Mhm.
I'm definitely somebody who can't walk away from the opportunity to tell a joke, even if it's not the right time to do that, because it makes you feel better.
Right.
And I agree. Watching something funny, engaging with other people, having migraine can be very isolating. So
Yes.
we demonize social media a lot, but this is how kids connect these days. And
Mhm.
so why are we telling them, oh, well, you're not allowed to FaceTime with your friend because you have a
Mhm.
migraine?
Right.
Depressing. We should be encouraging them in, to engage
To
with
get
other
engaged
people
and connect.
and to have
Right.
fun. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because the last thing we want, one of the first signs that they're getting depressed or getting down is isolation. They're isolating themselves. So
Right.
I think that they should be encouraged to do whatever they can to stay connected to their friends, even if they're not feeling well. I think that we
I
should probably
agree.
make the point that too is important. If parents out there do have a child, or if you are someone who has, certain phases or certain migraines where the photophobia is too bad, and
Mhm.
you're looking for things to have them do, what do you recommend? Like, I'm always thinking like coloring. A lot of people love to color. Are there other things you recommend?
There aren't specific things I recommend because I know everybody's different and everybody has different things that engage them. So,
Mhm.
playing a game with your parent,
Mhm.
whatever you can tolerate. I
Mhm.
mean, I think that it's really hard to make specific recommendations for specific people.
Right.
But some people listening to music, some people
Mhm.
listening to like a relaxing, relaxation tape.
Mhm.
There are lots of different things that people can do. But yeah, coloring, drawing, anything that you find to be fun
Right.
and that you can handle, I think is a reasonable thing to do.
Right. Okay. Is there anything else, Dr. Yonker? This has been awesome and it's so informative. And I hope that if any parents or anyone out there has any questions, that you'll go ahead and send them in and we will get them answered for you. Is there anything else, Dr. Yonker, that you'd like to add to this discussion on screen time and migraine?
Sure. I think that medical professionals also need to know this, and not just parents, because I think the
Mhm.
parents do this sometimes because this is what the doctors told them.
Mhm.
If you look at the automatic instructions from certain healthcare organizations about how to manage your migraines, you
Mhm.
really understand where some of this comes from,
Mhm.
because it's actually the medical professionals who are telling the parents this,
Right.
and it's really not anybody's fault.
Mhm.
I think it makes the parents feel really guilty, like, oh my gosh, I did this to my kid, this is
Oh
why
yeah.
headaches are this bad. They feel guilty already because it's usually an inherited problem. And
Mhm.
so, you know nobody's doing anything terribly wrong.
Mhm.
You got to try your best to do things that are healthy. And if there's something that's a trigger, it's usually pretty obvious.
Yeah.
I have people who come in to see me and they're like, we've done everything. We've gotten rid of gluten. We've cut down on screen time. We've, eliminated chocolate. We've done all these things. And, here this poor kid is still having multiple migraines a week. And I say to them, don't drive yourself crazy trying to find the trigger.
Right.
Sometimes the triggers are internal and not external, and it's not anything that anybody's doing wrong.
Mm.
So I'll tell the patients, you can't help inheriting a tendency towards migraine from your dear old mom or your dear old dad. You can control what you put in your mouth. You can control what time you put yourself to bed.
Right.
Teenagers can't control not being able to sleep at night because they're kind of biologically programmed to stay up late and sleep late. And the school district determines what time they have to get up in the morning.
Yeah.
You can't control how other people behave in life, but you can learn how to control how you react to it. And the rest of it's my problem to fix.
I love hearing that. Well, thank you, Dr. Yonker. That was very informative. I hope everyone enjoyed this week's episode of Heads Up. Please tune in again next week for the weekly podcast and webcast of the National Headache Foundation.